Go on.
Yeah, so I want to ask about original sin.
Okay.
So I want to know the understanding of the Christian whether the original sin starts right after the fall of man, or sorry, I want to know whether Adam himself was fallible before the fall of him in the garden, or he has, or or he began to be fallible after the sin. Was he
Okay.
fallible before the sin, or is it after the sin that he was fallible?
So when God created Adam, he did not create him a being with all the perfections of divinity. He was a perfectly created being insofar as God willed him to be created. But the natural state of man is to have weaknesses. And the natural state of man, as given by God, is that he has free will. And free will requires that he has the ability to make real choices that have real consequences. And so he always had the potentiality before the fall to fall, but he wasn't created in a state of fallenness.
Okay, so if I understand this position, that he has a free will, but do you think that a perfect person can abuse his will by doing something which he knows that that same day he's going to die, and yet he went ahead to do that thing? Do you think
Yeah,
that's
so
a perfect thing?
it depends. We've got to be clear about what we mean by perfect. Perfect here doesn't mean incapable of fault. Perfect here means that he is created to the end that he is created, he's perfectly suited. So if I create a hammer, the point of me creating a hammer is that I can hit a nail on a head and drive it through wood, right? So long as my hammer does that, I've created a perfect hammer. But my hammer is no good for repairing vases. You know, it's no good for keyhole surgery. So it's not perfect in the sense that it can do everything or avoid every fault. You know, the fact that I've made a hammer means that I've made something heavy, which means that as well as being able to drive nails through wood, it can also smash vases. It's not created to smash vases, but it can smash vases. And so when we say that man is created perfectly, we mean that he's created perfectly so that he can have union and that he can have relationship with God, his creator, to know him and to enjoy him. And all that he needs to do that, he possesses. And so he's perfect to the end to which he is created. But with that perfection comes the possibility of him doing something wrong, and that's what happens at the fall.
Okay, I kind of agree with this answer, but I have discussed this with many Christians, and what they always tell me is that man began to be fallible after the fall, after the sin, after Adam, and that doesn't explain why Adam would sin in the first place. But this answer you gave me kind of like uh make more sense, because Adam couldn't have sinned if he himself was not fallible in the first place. So because some of the Christians say he is not like he is perfect, he is infallible right from the beginning. So I think I kind of agree with this answer that he himself was not like infallible in the first place.
Yeah. You've just got to understand, Ismail, like lots of Christians are very well meaning, but that doesn't mean that they're very knowledgeable. You know, lots of Christians, they want to be helpful and they want to give answers, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they've studied sufficiently to give answers. One of the problems within the church that I would openly acknowledge is that too many Christians are too eager just to say anything without recognizing the limits of their own knowledge. And I
All right.
sometimes am guilty of that as well.
Oh, exactly. Thank you so much. This kind of
No
help.
worries.
This answer kind of help.
Good. I'm glad it helped, brother. If you've got any other questions, feel free to rock them out. We're here.
Okay. The next question I want to ask is actually about the book of Luke chapter 1 verse 5 to 6, where it says
Let me just
that
pull it up, bro.
both Zach
Bear with us 1 second.
both
Let me just pull it up. Luke chapter 1, verse
Verse 5 to 6.
36.
So, verse 5 to 6.
5 to 6. Okay, let's read it. So there was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, a certain priest named Zechariah of the course of Abia, and his wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. And they were both righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord, blameless.
Yeah. So that part that said they were following all the law blamelessly.
Yep.
So I'm kind of like, what does that actually mean that they were following all the law? I don't know where is that a hyperbole or is that actually literally like they are following all the law blamelessly, like they are sinless?
Yeah, so there's multiple. There's not one answer to this question. In all honesty, Christians have different understandings of it. Let me just read to you. Let me just read to you some of the church fathers and what they say. So I'm going to read to you Cornelius of Lepida, and he does like a gathering in of lots of commentators on the. Let me see if I can find a smaller quote because that one's gigantic. Okay, I'm going to read George Leo Haydock. Oh, actually, hold on. Here, I'll do Ignatius of Antioch. For he, in his harmony with the commandments and ordinances of the Lord, even as the strings are with the harp, and is no less blameless than was Zacharias the priest. That's speaking about Jesus. Irenaeus of Lyon says this. Luke, I'm sorry, bear with me. My computer's trying to be smart and offer me things I don't want it to. Luke also, the follower of the disciple of the apostles, referring to Zacharias and Elizabeth, from whom, according to the promise, John was born, says, and they were both righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord. I'll read George later. Both just, walking without blame, which are called venial faults, but only from such sins as might make them forfeit the grace and favor of God. Three things are here to be noticed: that good men do keep all God's commandments, which some moderns declare to be impossible; that men are justified not by imputation only of Christ's justice, nor by faith alone. This is a particularly Catholic view and one from the Reformation, but by walking in the commandments. And three, that keeping and doing the commandments is properly our justification through Jesus Christ. The Greek word dikomata is properly rendered by Catholics justification or commandments, because the keeping of them through Jesus Christ is justification. But our separated brethren purposefully avoid the word against the justification of the Catholics, as one of their leaders in innovation blushes not to advance. So I reject some of what George Haydock says here, but what he's arguing for is that there's a distinction between what we would call venial sin and what we would call mortal sin, which is a biblical distinction. Because in Scripture, in the Epistle of John, it says that not all sins lead to death. And so the position that George is taking, the position that the bit of what he says that I do agree with, is the idea that, or that I believe it, can work with this passage, is that if we think about venial sin as us stumbling as we walk towards God, and mortal sin is when we turn our back towards God and walk away from him. Okay? So this is the difference between a sin that leads to death and one that doesn't. So in all things that don't lead to death, Zacharias is keeping the law. However, so it's like the difference between keeping the word of the law and the spirit of the law. You can keep the letter of the law, but not necessarily keep the spirit of the law. So there was a certain degree to which Zacharias and Elizabeth were keepers of the law and righteous before all people, but there's another passage in Scripture where it says all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And so whilst Zacharias and while Zacharias, bear with me, yeah, whilst Zacharias and his wife Elizabeth were keeping, as it were, let's say the letter of the law, they would have faltered in the spirit of the law. And so in one sense, they can be said to be keeping the ordinances and the law of God and to be keeping it fully and to be righteous. But in another sense, they can still fall short of the glory of God, because that's what sin is. It is to fall short of the glory of God. And so in one sense, you can keep, in one sense, you can embody to a certain degree the fullness of the law, and in another sense, you can lose the spirit of the law and fall short of the glory of God. Does that make sense? Do you understand?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. So it's like someone who, let's say someone who did his wudu perfectly, and did the movements of salat perfectly, but yet in his heart, when he's praying, he doesn't manage to keep his mind in constant remembrance of Allah. So he's performed the wudu and he does all the motions of salat perfectly, but he hasn't remembered Allah perfectly. You know?
Yeah,
and
that's
so
possible. That's possible.
Yeah, it's possible. So in one sense, he's kept the Sharia perfectly. He's kept the wudu and the actions perfectly. But in another sense, he hasn't embodied the spirit of Sharia perfectly. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yeah.
And so Zachariah and Elizabeth embodied the letter of the law perfectly. And so to everyone looking at them, they were righteous people. And don't get me wrong, they were righteous people. They're not bad people. They're good people. By every measure of a Jew in the first century, these two people were good people. But there will have been things in their own life where they didn't embody the spirit of the law, and thus they also would have fallen short of the glory of God.
Thank you so much.